Thank you, Julio. Thank you all to all participants for being here. This conference is very important for the Life Adapt project, and we're very, very happy with the level of all the presentations and the importance that is given to livestock breeding in different countries. In this last session of the day, we're going to speak about governance, policies, and CAP, Common Agricultural Policies. We should rather talk about the non-governance, non-policy, and given the situation. Governance refers to all processes involved with government, institution, and practices of decision making and regulation that affect all of society. We've been trying for many years to convince the administration that it was necessary to establish a government model in which not only the administration is represented, but also civil society, articulated through different platforms and organizations, such as Ganaderos en Red, the Spanish Dehesa Association. We've tried to raise our voice, do our work in a responsible way. We've been trying to tell the public administration what the needs of the sector are, and the results, I must say, have been quite disappointing. The National Network for Livestock Breeding was created by the government, central government. We have met a couple of times, all the stakeholders involved in rural environment. The results of the works were quite positive. But unfortunately, once again, when the strategic plan was approved, the industrial animal farming lobby prevailed, and extensive livestock breeding is still being marginalized. And that's why we should talk about the non-CAP, non-governance, and non-policy. Because of the lack of policies, we had dreamt about a different CAP, Common Agricultural Policy. We had dreamt of measures that are so urgent in a country like Spain that is semi-arid. In areas like ours, trees are vital and for their role in providing shade. You always, when you drive around the country, you always see cattle under the shadow of trees, and trees should have given much more importance than they were in such a long document that is 2,600 pages long, and there is some reference to agro-pastoral systems, but it's a reference that doesn't really say much. We had dreamt about a different model without which it will be impossible that the depopulated rural Spain will start to take off again. We are very happy to see all the measures that are in favor of environmental protection, but we were very disappointed by the results, and that's why I will leave the floor now to the panelists that will explain the situation in detail. I've been here for many years. I've been expressing my opinions in many different fora, and I've been trying to express a vision for what we thought should be an idea for a future of our country, in which not everything is centered around urban centers, making the most of all the richness and diversity that rural areas can provide, a model in which different territories are connected, and in which civil society takes the lead. Maria this morning was referring to health issues. We shouldn't sit at a table to eat unhealthy food that is generating a real epidemics of health issues related with bad food quality. This should have been taken on board in the latest version of the CAP. Why don't we have any help for mobile slaughterhouses? Why don't we get support and help to help us in short distance or short scale distribution, so that children living in rural areas see that they have a future there, that they can make a living with cheese making, with biochemistry, with genetics. I can think of 1,000 different ways in which younger generations could live in those areas based on a much more sustainable and happy models. I'm not going to talk about CAP because it's very depressing. It's depressing to see that we have gone from receiving 61 euros per hectare of grass of pasture land, and now we're going to receive 50, and with a whole host of conditions. So I'm going to pass the floor to Javier. Well, I think that I can manage my own time. My name is Javier Ruiz. I work for WWF in the European office, where we've been working on a CAP, but today I will talk about other policies that are not necessarily CAP, but that are relevant for what we're talking about, with the objective of answering this question. That is, are these hard times for pastoralism in European policies? Or trying to answer this question, I'll give you a few comments. I've left my slides in English. It is important when we refer to European policies to say that those are policies that came into force between 2019 and today. In the past few years, and this is very relevant because it's the period of the elections of last elections in the European Parliament and the European Green Deal that came that was tabled in 2019. That doesn't mean that when policies are designed, there's no longer term objective. For example, there is the 2030 target as far as climate change commitment as well. There are several messages that arrive from Europe, but it is important to bear in mind that in these 5 years mandate periods, there are many ideas that are proposed, but not all of them are then accompanied by legal measures that guarantee their employment. A very clear example is this 25% target of organic farming in Europe. There's no other measures that supports this general desire, but there's no concrete mechanism. No one is going to come to the Spanish government and say you have a problem because you haven't reached the target by 2030 and you'll be sanctioned. Those are just, it's more of a wishful thinking based on general guidelines. But then there are guidelines that then translate into legal and economic measures. This has happened in certain cases, in the case of carbon neutrality, in certain pesticides. So I'm going to touch upon a couple of ideas as far as strategies. The first one will be concerning the biodiversity strategy that is based on the 2030 horizon. In this document, the European Commission doesn't mention the importance of farming systems, the importance of habitat loss due to agricultural development. It's not mentioned at all. This means that this is not politically relevant. All the objectives concerning farming systems are included in the CAP. Well, of course, through organic farming we can reduce the impacts on the environment of agricultural activities. But the biodiversity strategy that focuses on conserving and restoring, well, the main lines of work, the main axes are habitat protection, peatland protection, and farmland birds. Those are the three main axes. Where could extensive livestock farming contribute here? In many respects, but in order to be able to fit into this strategy, one needs to prove that they fit in these three axes. And what about the farm to fork strategy? It is a very wide, overarching strategy, very interesting. I'm far from criticizing it, but don't expect from this strategy to hint at the fact that extensive livestock breeding is something positive. Here they only mention about certain additives that can be added to fodder, for animal fodder. And what does it say about livestock systems? It says we should support livestock systems that are more efficient in terms of carbon capture. Well, you may think it's extensive livestock, but some could argue that it is the Dutch dairy industry that is most efficient from a carbon cycle point of view. Therefore, it's not easy to find support, considering that much of what should be achieved could be achieved through the common agricultural policy that, as Pia said, is very aligned to those other priorities. If we analyze other strategies that have been approved recently, the methane and climate change adaptation strategies, those are not very relevant. Of course, the methane strategy mentions livestock farming, animal breeding, but the regulation that is under discussion right now has to do with the energy sector, not with livestock breeding. It mentions other areas like water management, as we did today, but nothing much. So at the same time, in this period, since 2019, we have experienced plenty of disruptions, and COVID pandemic, the war in Ukraine, that have affected our food systems. And this would be, we would have thought that it would have been an opportunity to change radically the system. And we would have thought that extensive livestock breeding would have had an opportunity, but that was not the case. So, are there really bad times ahead of livestock breeding, extensive livestock breeding? If we compare the current situation with the situation we had 10 years ago, we can say that the climate change debate doesn't favor animal farming, whereas 10 years ago we could talk about integrated farming systems. Now we're talking about much more strict protection, and in this case extensive animal farming has a more limited role. But even if the prospects are not so good, we still have to keep playing and seeing what opportunities come up. And I think there is something that has been mentioned, and I'd like to refer to it. We have mentioned a series of policies that could affect animal farming, but there are also national policies that can greatly affect the sector at the national level. So those decisions lie with national governments. What we need to do is win the battle at the regional and national level, proving that, giving evidence to show that extensive livestock farming is the future, and then the regions can adapt and approve corresponding measures.
Bueno, buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you. My name is Pedro Maria Herrera. I worked at the Fundación Entre Tantos. I've been part of the Life Adapt project since the beginning. And I was put here in the policies panel, so I'm going to try to do my best. And I'm going to try to follow on what was said by Javi Ruiz in the end. That is, the framework given to us by the European Union is there, the general policy framework. So now what we have to do is see how we're going to interpret it. And when we talk about interpretation, we need to be particularly cautious and not get ourselves in a difficult situation, because we want the narrative about extensive livestock to be the one that we really want to send. It's important to go back to what Javi was saying, to go back to integration and to go back to a narrative where the benefits from extensive livestock in this context are perceived by everyone. There are some aspects that have been mentioned here, for example, in the emissions panel, that was fascinating. But in a certain way, the many things that have been said have to do with those traps that are in our way and that we have to get away from. Because in a certain way, the proposals on how to confront livestock, extensive livestock, and climate change are supported on efficiency, and efficiency has a limit, because at the end of the day, it's about getting a production that is subjected to a growing demand because of the increase of the population and because of the increase of the demand of certain products. And at the end of the day, efficiency is not something that can be increased perpetually, because we're talking about carbon sequestration, and as Gerardo was saying, sequestration reaches a limit, and the same thing happens with efficiency. You cannot reach more liters of milk or with the same amount of feed. Another trap is the sectorization. The fight against climate change is addressed in sectors, and it's been addressed from a very reductionist perspective or approach. And if we make different sectors, we are lost, because the most industrialized sectors have a much easier time to carry out the measurements and to categorize their system. So for them, it's way easier to show that they are reducing, that they're behaving better. It doesn't really matter whether you are acting horribly. You can show that you're acting well. The problem is that us, extensive livestock that was behaving pretty well in global terms, is going to have a much harder time to show that it's behaving better, particularly in a context of climate change that goes against animal farming, because it's one of the sectors that is suffering this situation the most. So how can we face this? Basically, by talking about integration when they try to push everything to sectors. And what we have to do is to have a global perspective. All entities, entities and administration, and all of us who are supporting extensive animal farming, this is what we have to do. We have to give a territorial approach. The territory is the basis that sustains civilization. territory is not something that nature offers to us for free. No, territories need to be managed, and in the conditions that we have now, in the era of Anthropocene, where humanity is the first cause of change in the global context, we have to be able to transmit that we know how to manage the territory, ecosystemic systems, the supply of elements that are offered to us by the territory, and we have to do this right. And in order to manage territories well, we need animal farming, extensive animal farming, because we don't have any other mobile units that generate high-level products and that can be used in a systematic way and in a global way. And we also need to integrate something that has been said during this morning: food policies. You were talking about health as a key aspect, and food too, because food is health, and we all need to eat. And when we talk about how we eat and how we produce food, extensive animal farming has a series of advantages that are easy to understand and easy to transmit, and that are very much related to what we were saying about efficiency at the beginning. It's a different type of efficiency. We're not talking about efficiency in terms of we inject this in the system, we reproduce X. No, we're saying that we inject very little to the system, we produce really well, and what we are injecting in the system are materials, fibers, grass that could not be used otherwise, that do not pertain to the realm of human food. If we do not transform this matter using ruminants, herbivores, these would not be transformed. They would accumulate in the ecosystem, and since we have to transform this, the accumulation of this matter would be dangerous. What I mean is that nature needs to process this production. If the territory is fragmented, if we don't have wild herbivores, we don't have large herbivores, and we have to manage this, and we do not manage anything, it will be the fire, for instance, that will be managing this primary production, and we know what the consequences of fires are. And it's also very important to mention the coordination between administrations and the integration between forest policies, agricultural policies, and animal farming policies. The concept of a circular economy may be a framework that we can use, but it's important to have strategies that have this territorial perspective. We can only have one sustainability strategy. We can't have an agricultural strategy, an animal farming strategy, and a forestry strategy, and an environmental strategy that are going in different directions, because then at the end of the day the mitigation measures will be canceling each other, because mitigation measures often have very reduced impact and are generating problems in other aspects. And there's something that we also need to emphasize, and that is adaptation, because a key aspect that is given by extensive animal farming is adaptation to climate change and mitigation of climate change. And one of the main arguments that we may pose when we talk about animal farming is that adaptation doesn't go at the expense of mitigation, because many of the technological measures that are being proposed, or measures that just address specific problems, have a downside. Steps are being taken on an international level and at many levels, but there's still a lot to do. The role of animal farming needs to be heard as a clear voice, as a voice that understands that this territorial process is something there's just one single project, and animal farming needs to play that very relevant role. I want to wrap up with a very clear aspect. There are two aspects that have been mentioned here in different presentations that I would like to use to wrap up my presentation. Then we have the multifunctionality of territories. We need solutions that improve the situation in different aspects that are integrated within one single vision, and for this we need territories that are capable of producing foods, services, culture, regulations in the same block within the same strategy. And here we're talking about agroforestry systems, multifunctionality. In general, is one of our mottos. And then we have territorial governments, the development of institutions that are participatory, where all interests, all stakeholders are represented, and where everyone has the capacity to govern their territories and lead them to situations in which climate change is a problem that we can adapt to, and that we can, in the face of which we can propose effective solutions. Thank you very much.
Ok. Boa tarde a todos. Eu peço desculpa, vou falar.
Sorry, I'm going to speak in a mix of Portuguese and Spanish. I hope you managed to understand me. I'll speak.
Ou para modificarmos ou tentarmos fazer instrumentos diferentes a nível nacional ou a nível regional. O trabalho que eu vou apresentar é o trabalho.
So I will present the work that I've done along with my team. And I will speak about agro-pastoral systems of both sheep, cattle, and also pigs. What we have seen in the past few years is that this is a system that is in decline because es que estoy haciéndolo en inglés porque esto se supone.
No sul de Portugal nós temos cerca de 1 milhão de hectares de sistemas silvopastoris e termos desaparecimento de árvores ou perda de densidade de árvores. E julgo que o processo não será muito diferente em Espanha. O que acontece é que vamos perdendo densidade de árvores por várias causas que não tenho tempo agora para explicar, mas a partir de um certo... Okay, it's better in English? And they have difficulties. It's okay, for me it's better in English. Okay. It's okay, sorry. Yes. Okay. Okay. Okay, so what we observe is that we have been losing area of montado, of the silvopastoral system, by losing the trees. And after a certain threshold, you don't have any renewal of the trees. So it's a progressive and silent process. And it's what we are very much concerned with. We are losing like 5,000 hectares of area per year. It's very much, and even if you have a large area, it's disappearing. So this is the context we have as researchers working with the silvopastoral systems. And what we have been looking for is how can we collaborate or contribute to a change or contribute to improve the situation. So this is really, I think, a window of opportunity, and it's maybe a bit opposite to what my colleagues have said. It's just a very small project I'm going to tell you about, but it's something where we have managed to introduce something new, a new tool. So there was the intention when thinking about the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, that it should be more flexible and in concerning environment, be more based on results, so that farmers will be paid by the environmental results they provide. And this question of paying by results, it's something that the Commission is focusing on also in other areas. In the social area, for instance, they are already doing that, paying by results in improving of certain defavored classes or defavored groups. So it's another logic. Instead of paying for a certain practice, you pay if there are results. And this was, we got this information in 2017, so when the last CAP has started already, and they started thinking about the new one. So we could see there was maybe an opportunity to produce another tool for the silvopastoral systems. So it's also an opportunity to gather different actors, which those who normally talk. So I think what I would like to bring also is that we see this in our team. We see this as the role of researchers. We can push a bit for innovation because we are studying the processes, we understand the process, or we try to provide explanations, but we also somehow can organize a collective process and are closer to the policy level than sometimes farmers are, or we can do it better together with farmers. So, but also, I think one of the conditions is that we are integrated in a region, so we are well integrated in the Alentejo region. We work a lot with producers in different projects. We have been canalizing different project financing, so projects which are normally 3 years or 2 years, we have decided that we have a goal which is longer than the project, so we canalize project financial resources to this goal. And we have been keeping the dialogue with our stakeholders, so farmers and the administration all the time. So now we are very happy because it's just been released, the Portuguese strategic plan for the CAP, so the rules which will be set in place for the next 5 years. And we have this measure based on results for the Montado. There's 3 million euros dedicated to that, which is not a lot, but for a pilot, it's two pilot areas, so it's 2 small areas, and the calculation is maybe we'll be able to support like 6,500 hectares of farms or of areas with the results, with the environmental results. So it's something we are now going to be working with. We are the ones, our research center is the technical responsible for advising the farmers, so it's a very big responsibility, but we hope at least to try something new. What are measures based on results? These measures based on results, they are based on the result, which is effectively measured by indicators which are clearly defined, and the better result you have, the more payment you have. So it's very clear as is reasoning. The problem is set it in place, how to measure correctly. So the producer can decide, the farmer can decide how he wants to manage his silvopastoral system, and if he has the results, the good results, he will have maximum payment. So I will go quickly. The main thing is that the payment is for effective results, so the citizen, the European citizen knows what he's paying for. But also what we expect is that it will make farmers think in another way, think that they need, if they are providing these results, they are also managing the farm in a more sustainable way. So it's a stimulus to thinking more about how can I have a diversified and resilient silvopastoral system. So it's not only providing ecosystem services for the outside, it's also providing for the benefit of the exploitation itself, of the farm units. What we have done is that we have done all these in a dialogue with farmers and with other stakeholders. So it's like we started it, but then we have opened this dialogue, so the different phases we have been in contact and discussing the environmental objectives, the indicators, and then the payment was more with the administration. So the result must be connected with the practice. So if we want a result which doesn't have anything to do with the practice, then it's not meaningful. So it needs to be dependent on the farm practice. It needs to be connected with a nature conservation objective, and it needs to be proved or scientifically proved that this is an interesting result. So what we have for the Montado, it's something I think this is the most interesting, and this was discussed with the farmers, is that the renewal of the farm cover, of the forest cover, sorry, so the renewal of the trees, it's one objective. So if there's a good renewal, then it's considered very high. The pastures need to be Mediterranean biodiverse pastures, so they need to be biodiverse. The soil needs to be healthy, and then you need to have singular elements contributing to the diversity, yes. Like temporary ponds or riparian corridors or small areas of shrubs. So you need, these are the 4 results. And you know, we have indicators. I'm not going to show because I don't have the time, but we have very few. And you know, simple indicators for each of them. These indicators need to be measured in the field. So, for instance, the density of regeneration and the state, the health state of the small trees are the indicators for the forest cover. And I will pass. So we have been, you know, there's different levels. So each indicator can be measured only in 4 levels. But what counts is the classification, the total classification of the parcel from 0 to 10. So if you have 10, you have the very good condition. If you have 0, it's very deficient. And payment starts only when you have 5. So this, well, no, it's a calculation sheet. And what we aim is that the farm, instead of counting only with the cork or the cattle in his account, he will count with this healthy soil, regeneration, singular elements for the payment he gets at the end. And this is just the curve. We are, in principle, it looks like it's going to work because the payment, the 2 first lines or the 3 first lines are the lines of what you get per hectare in these payments in relation to the payments that the farmer can opt optionally. So the traditional agro-environmental and the support for grazing areas. So in any case, if he has more than 5 points, so the average level, he gets a superior payment. So we expect that this will raise interest for the farmer. So this is per hectare, and this is cumulated in a, you know, from 20 hectares to, I think it's 600. So the value which we managed the ministry to adapt, the value of payment, it's very positive in relation to what is there already. So it's just starting. We cannot tell you how many farmers will be interested, but we hope there will be some, and that we can test this model and see if it gives more sustainability to the montados. Thank you very much for your attention.
Bueno, buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the organizers for having invited the coalition for another PAC. Another PAC is another CAP, sorry, another common agricultural policy is possible. I don't know if my presentation is visible here. My name is Tamara Rodriguez Ortega, and I'm part of the Spanish Ornithology organization that, together with the WWF, are part of the technical office of the another CAP is possible. It's impossible to talk about the situation of excessive animal farming within the CAP without giving an overview about the CAP, particularly for those of you who are not familiar with the CAP. The Common Agricultural Policy manages 1/3 of the EU's budget. It has adapted to the different circumstances, social and economical circumstances in our territory. In the beginning, it used to protect markets more, and from then it moved to supporting the liberalization of the agricultural and food production. Then it supported production, and then it got disconnected from the production. Lastly, the scientific and the civil community, civil society, wants more environmental objectives in the policy, and that's why we focus our work on this environmental aspect. This is one of the policies that has a bigger impact in the field, and it reaches 50% of the Spanish surface. But it is very relevant because there are aspects that are not accounted for. So although we want to see these environmental objectives, it's a policy that has not been able to respond to the multiple crises in the fields. On the one hand, since the climate objectives were included, this was not able to reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases. It wasn't enough to alleviate the loss of biodiversity. It wasn't useful either for maintaining the number of farms. In some periods, 11,000 farms close down every year. And lastly, it creates high inequality. 80% of the budget goes to 20% of the beneficiaries. In this context of this last reform that started in 2018, civil society organized itself and created this coalition that is called for a different CAP, to have a fair, healthy, egalitarian CAP that respects the environment and the well-being of everyone. It includes 50 organizations from different fields, extensive animal farming, organic production, environmental organizations, nutrition, and consumers. The mission is to change CAP, to turn it into a policy that has a real potential to create a fair ecological transition and fair systems. As I was saying, as my colleague just said, there is a new approach in the regulation in Europe. It shifted from commitments to the delivery of results, and that's one of the objectives we have in different types of objectives, and there is more subsidiarity to member states in such a way that it's no longer the European Commission and the Parliament and the Council who create a single regulation for all member states. There is the possibility to adapt the CAP to the specificities of each country. In this adaptation that Spain carried out, we will have a new CAP that starts in 2027. And you know that there are two pillars. Pillar number one, that includes, out of 100% of direct payments, 61% will go to basic income support, and then there's a maximum cap to the basic income support. So it gets reduced down to 100,000. It will never be higher than 200,000 per farm, and then we have redistributive payments to support smaller farms. In the beginning it was smaller and medium-sized farms, but it's supporting just medium farms more widely. And then we have what used to be the greening, that was 30%, and then we have a complement for young people of 2% with a complement for women, and the associated subsidies for crops. And then there's a sectorial pack. And then on the other hand, we have the second pillar that includes environmental commitments, support to areas with natural limitations, specific disadvantages, productive and non-productive investments, etc. And then we have a series of requirements that have to be met to receive this support, being an active farm and meet the environmental environmental regulations. I want to emphasize that this is just one part. The environmental regulations have to be respected by everyone, but to receive this support, you just have to meet some of the requirements, so the emissions are very low. And then there are some environmental aspects that have to be met to receive this support. And this new CAP includes a social conditionality to meet the requirements. Then we have what we refer to as environmental architecture. It includes these reinforced environmental conditions, and then on a higher level we have the eco regimes, and then the higher level are the agricultural and environmental measures. So what is this basic income support plus redistributive payment for the surfaces that that meet the requirements, that are eligible? So we have the payments that do not distinguish between crops, and although the 316 areas that are here used to include 50 payment regions, with this reform the number was reduced to 20, in such a way that regions where payments were higher were unified with areas where lower payments. Within each region, the average regional values are converging, with the intention that by 2029, by the end of the CAP, there will be a full convergence. And what do we see here for extensive animal farming? The most interesting category would be permanent pastures. I say more interesting because when it comes to I say interesting, but it's not so much, because the amounts per hectare is one of the lowest, and there are differences between the north and the south of Spain. The lighter greens are the lowest amounts, and the darkest the highest amounts. And then we have a difference with the rest of surfaces. We have the irrigated lands. Much has been said about how they use waters, and they are the ones who are receiving the highest payments. So there may be explanations about why they receive 67 euro per hectare and others receive 1,400, but I don't understand them. As for the eco schemes, we have agroecology and carbon agriculture, and there are 6 types of practices. The most relevant one for animal farming is extensive grazing, just part of the productive systems, and productive orientations was included. I would also want to emphasize that I should have done this in the previous slide, because the coefficient for pastures is 0 in forest areas, so they wouldn't be receiving this income support, and they wouldn't benefit from these eco regimes in this type of surfaces. There was a very interesting proposal at the beginning in these eco regimes, and that was to have additional payments when we're talking about that Natura 2000 network, or where there was a coexistence with carnivores, but this was finally not passed. This morning you were talking about mechanical management. That won't be allowed. It won't be able to coexist with grazing. And then we have to mention, obviously, that these amounts are lower in the case of extensive livestock keeping in permanent pastures compared to irrigated surfaces. These amounts respond to the fact that this policy considers incurred costs and payments that do not, or income that does not take place. So that means that practices that are carried out adequately are not subsidized. Here we have support for landless pastoralists to be able to use stubble fields, although the support for these practices is one of the lowest, and this is compatible with the previously mentioned supports to sheep and goats. There are more types of support within the CAP, but they are managed on a regional level and the regulations are not ready yet. That's why I didn't want to include them, and because I didn't want to extend myself too much. But I wanted to include this research by Datavista that tells us about the emissions connected to the pig system, how factory farms are located in terms of nitrate vulnerable areas. And what we see here is that although it's a sector that usually doesn't get any direct CAP support, it does receive some support. Here we have some figures since 2020. We see how the main companies have received 40 million and amounts on that level. There's also in this research a very interesting chapter about super intensive olive orchards. I wanted to include this last slide about global governance. We demanded transparency in the administration when it comes to manage and design the CAP. When the European Commission published its observations and Spain had to respond, we have not been able to access that document, the detailed document, as well as other communications with the commissions. We haven't been able to access that. We wanted to have more public participation. We think that in all follow-up committees there should be a balance between the administration and civil society. All stakeholders should be present, and there should be some measures, some times, and some documents that are adequate. We cannot read 1,000 pages of regulation overnight. And finally, we need more co-responsibility between the relevant public administrations. For example, the environmental administration knows about sanctions carried out by certain producers. Well, they should communicate it for those producers not to get the subsidies. So we should make these policies benefit the supply of public benefits and the benefit of ecosystems, rather than direct subsidies to those very dubious purposes. Thank you very much.
Bueno, pues como hemos sido muy rigurosos con el cumplimiento de los...
Since we've been very strict with the use of time, we still have some time for debate. We ask you to be brief when you ask your questions and get to the point. You can also those that are following through the streaming can also ask or make comments if they want.
Esto de que no se levante ninguna mano es una consecuencia natural.
The fact that no one raises their hand is probably a consequence of the chaos that the CAP has generated. A couple of short questions. One is for Tamara. During the CAP process, there was another CAP that was in force. Do you have the impression that that you were able to interfere with the bad intentions that the ministry had initially? Then a question for the Portuguese colleague. Is this measure been approved? Is the payment according to results? Yes, Tamara is answering. Yes, we did manage to change a few things, both the coalition itself and our organizations individually. We've made loads of proposals. Some have been accepted. Some were accepted because others were backed them as well, or the ministry realized they were good proposals, and others were not accepted. For example, the possibility of grazing as a way to clear shrublands, and it was not accepted. Also, when we demand that there is more transparency, we've made some progress. There has been more transparency in this negotiation compared to the previous ones, and we have sent many emails and we have asked to change things, and they answered and said that the whole proposal was that was sent had some problems. It wasn't readable, so they have amended the text, and they told us that it was sorted, and so we managed to achieve some of the results. Yes.
Yeah, it is in function now. So it's just in the new CAP in Portugal. There are two sites. One is the Natura 2000 site of Monforado. The other one is the Guadiana Valley. So it's only in these areas, so a bit larger. It is in these areas and the surrounding that farmers can opt for apply to this instead of the normal agro-environmental measures. They can opt for this one. And we will be giving technical support, because it's important for these measures that there is direct technical support to help them make an estimation of these indicators and the value. That will happen organized by us, the University of Évora in Monforado, and by a producer organization in the Guadiana Valley. So it's, yeah, and there is 3 million euros to pay for this contract. So it's a pilot, but it's a pilot with a little bit of money. So that's why we think it's good to announce it now, because it was possible. We don't know what will be the results, but we hope some farmers will be interested. They calculated there will be, in these 3 million, they will be able to pay about 6,500 hectares under this scheme. So in 5 years we can tell you how it went.
Pedro, Mari quería hacerte una puntualización, Gerardo.
Mari wanted to reply to what Tamara, add something to what Tamara said. The final proposal that was approved dropped a few amendments that were not revolutionary, but they were quite straightforward, like the fact that they would keep certain payments for those animal farmers that are in Natura 2000 sites. This tells us a lot about the process. The final result is that we keep the status quo, and that's the end of it. I also wanted to add something concerning pilot projects, and that was used in many countries. Here in Spain, Spain, I don't know of any region that has used the regional development funds to promote the rural development funds to promote these pilot projects. I think that Navarra did something similar, but it wasn't quite the same. To use funds from the second pillar of the CAP to do innovative things like what was done in Portugal is a very good idea. We should use pilot projects. There's a flagship project in Ireland where they have 3 or 4 projects funded based on similar models. So the capacity that regional governments have to promote those initiatives with rural development funding is there, and so we need to make pressure so that they do use this capacity. I wanted to ask Javi, based on your experience in Brussels, if you think that in the past few years, since you've been there, you can see a change in attitude by European officers towards extensive livestock breeding, or we're still as we were at the beginning. I would answer no. I don't think that the perception or the attitude has improved much. What Brussels has done with the current CAP is delegate a lot of decision making to national governments. The feeling you get when you speak with EU officers is a feeling of relief. Okay, they cannot blame it on me now. Now, if things are not being done properly, it's national government's fault. So they made up a system that is geared to the measurement of results, but that's only on paper. Then they don't have any means to implement that model. For example, in forested pasture lands, it will be member states that will decide if they want to apply a coefficient or not. I'm not going to tell you how you should do it. So they stepped back and they realized it was a touchy issue, so they decided to retrieve and let national governments decide. The technical knowledge is there. Now we need to see if this technical knowledge of the diversity of situations we have is translated into something else. Pia mentioned it. We should give a more tailored treatment to forested pasture lands, and they're still in this limbo in which there's no decision taken and no clear definition. There was already a position approved by the European Parliament, but then they decided they didn't want to get into that trouble.
All these exceptions that could have given rise to more of a respect to the situations in the Mediterranean were not accepted. We heard that 25% of that one of the 2030 objectives is to have 20% of organic production, but the EU does not have any means to support their member states to achieve this objective. I didn't have the last results because the last strategic plans haven't been made public yet, but the situation of the 28 strategic plans sent by the member states to Brussels this spring, I think just one or two included a specific objective about where they wanted to be in 2027 in terms of their organic production. 1/3 of the European budget is spent this way. You're telling countries that they have to include this objective, and countries refused. It's just their intentions, just like to quantify the intentions. The idea was to say, okay, I'm in 2022. By 2027, I want my organic production to be, let's say, if right now it's 7, I want to reach 10%. And that would give you a measure or an argument to say the measures that are included in your strategic plans can help you or are going to suffice to meet the objectives or not. Well, member states just refused. They refused to quantify their objectives. That's the attitude of member states when it comes to the European Commission. And when we have attitudes like this, yes, we have to talk about results. I give you money, you give me results. Well, what happens is that countries make sure that there's no mechanism that involves any economic sanction. They don't accept anything, any sanctions or any mechanisms like that. I think countries are very defensive. They have a very defensive attitude when it comes to anything that may involve controls, monitoring, or sanctions. That's a feeling that I get. And this is the context where things are happening. Let's wrap up. I think there has been an interesting debate, and I wanted to emphasize two things that I found very important when it comes to the CAP. One is the amount of competences that regional governments have, and this is an opportunity to be close to our regional governments, and as civil society and as organizations we need to advocate for our requirements to be heard when it comes to extensive animal farming. And I think it's also very important that as civil society we promote the cooperation between the different public administrations, because as of today there's no cooperation. A few days ago some subsidies for sustainable development were published for the ESA, and in these subsidies the creation of wells was included, and the confederation, the hydrological confederation of the Guadiana, not only is not going to allow wells, but it's closing wells. So laws cannot be made turning your back onto the reality, and this is something that we have to promote in our organizations. We need public administrations to sit down together and to cooperate to give us solutions. So I think it's time to wrap up this afternoon session. We need to rest, and we reconvene here tomorrow. Tomorrow we're starting at 9, right? It's going to be a really interesting day. Thank you very much, everyone, and see you tomorrow. Just for organizers and people who are participating in the panels, if you're going to go to the hotel, we have made a reservation in the restaurant called Rubio in Puerta de Almodóvar at 9 p.m. So we'll wait for you there. So tomorrow at 9 we reconvene. Thank you.